I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about your attitudes about change. Change is the one certainty in life, and the reality is that no matter how secure your life is, or my life, or anyone's life, we're going to be faced with change. Change takes place in our life at many, many different levels. It takes place in our families, it takes place in our jobs, it takes place in the world itself. And if we're going to be growing people, if we're going to be individuals that are embracing the reality of life, we need to be people who have positive attitudes about change. That's a very difficult thing because we like the security of having things the way that they have always been. Whenever change comes into our life, especially challenging change, we begin to be threatened. But in truth, when change begins to bother us, it is really when changes come about that bring into our life experience things that we don't think should be the way they are. We want them to be the way they used to be. But in reality, we are constantly moving through a process of change, and that change brings to us a learning experience. I'd like to invite you to transform or change your idea about changes in your life and transform your thought process so that change brings not dread and not fear, but an opening of yourself to the learning experiences of life. Every change that comes into your life and my life, every change that comes onto planet Earth, every change in our environment and in our being brings something of great value. When changes come that threaten us, though, it's difficult for us many times to see the value. But as we change our way of thinking, we're able to change the quality of our life. One of the things that we teach in New Thought is that we live in our minds and not in the world. As we condition our thought process, we can change the way that we think about the things that happen to us. And as we change that thinking, that thought process, the quality and fiber of our life change. The circumstance may not change, the situation and the event may not change, but the way that we feel about it will determine how our life reflects and how we feel inside and how we project to other people. There's a story told of a South American Indian tribe, and they were moving through the jungles and the forests, and they came upon a chainsaw. And to these people, a chainsaw didn't have much meaning. To the people who had left it, the people who were developing that particular forest, it was an instrument that brought to them a great ease of cutting trees and leveling the land. But the South American Indians, finding the chainsaw, didn't know what it was. It was there, it was fully operational, it had gasoline in it, but to them, they had no idea what it was about. They took it to their village and took it to the elders, and the elders looked at it and examined it and passed it from one to the other, and they debated and discussed, but then they didn't know what to do with it, and they thought it was a useless piece or a useless instrument, and so they dug a hole and they buried it. And they went on about their life collecting wood for the fires of their village and for their huts. Had they known the value of that chainsaw, had they known what it could do for them, it could have changed their life tremendously. But they didn't see this as an instrument of change. They didn't understand what it was for. All they saw was something that they couldn't understand. And try as they did to embrace the concept, they couldn't move from seeing this instrument of change into making the change a reality in their life. They missed an opportunity to make a dynamic and cataclysmic change in their daily life. In your life and in my life, we do similar things. We view the changes that come into our life as things that we don't understand. We don't understand necessarily why we lose a job, why we don't have the financial resources that we believe we need, why an illness comes, why a family is disrupted and needs to be reorganized. But in truth, all of these changes come as opportunities for us to move in a new and different direction. Several years ago, someone came to our church for counseling. This individual had lost their job, was very bitter, and was very hopeless, and was very down in terms of their feeling, their mental attitude about what had happened. And this individual could only see the fact that they had lost their job and they didn't know what they were going to do. In the process of the counseling, we encouraged that individual to look at this as a reality of life, that that job had been lost, that the decision had been made at the workplace, that their position was no longer needed, and it was time for them to open themselves to a new direction and to a new job and to be guided and directed in a new way of life and a new way of thinking. That was a very difficult process for that individual. He worked through it over the course of weeks and months and ultimately did find another job, actually found another job that he liked better. Interestingly, in the process of talking with this individual about the loss of his job, one of the things that I learned and that we shared, the two of us, in reviewing this experience was that he really didn't enjoy his job very much. As a matter of fact, he disliked his job. He had been in it for 10 years. He didn't like the job. It didn't give him great satisfaction. And yet he continued to go to work because it did give him income and he felt secure with that income. But within himself, the job was not giving him satisfaction. It was not fulfilling. As we worked through this experience, one of the things that we brought to his mind was that this change came about not because it was something that he initiated, because if he had had his choice, he would have stayed in his job forever, for as long as he had worked. But in reality, this change in his work experience brought to him a change in life that he would not have brought to himself. And because of it, he was forced out of a situation that was unfulfilling and unhappy. And it opened the possibility for him to go and seek another opportunity or job. That's a different way of thinking about a negative experience. The reality is, as we said earlier, we live in our minds and not in the world. Perhaps you say that's a Pollyanna kind of an attitude. That's an unbelievable way of looking at a difficulty or a hardship in life. But in reality, isn't it a positive way of looking at the negatives in life? This man had lost his job. That was a given. The job was gone. The decision was made. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was where he was at the time. And the process of life brings us to and through experiences that many times are not pleasant and are not the ones that we would choose. But they are bringing us to something that many times we cannot even comprehend. But as they bring us opportunities and value that we could have never imagined. He could have remained in his negative thought process. He could have remained unhappy. He could have remained depressed. And he could have sat for a long period of time wringing his hands, talking about, isn't it awful? Instead, what we encouraged him to do was to look at this as an opportunity, not an opportunity that he chose, not a change that he chose, but an opportunity and a change that he could embrace and from it gain something positive, and in it change the direction of his life. In order to do this, in order to change your way of thinking about transitions and changes and challenges in your life, we invite you to transform the way that you think about negative changes in your own life experience. In order to do that, there are a couple of things that you can do. One is whenever a change comes into your life that appears to be negative or hurtful or unhappy, appears to be, embrace that and declare it to be a change for good. Declare it to be a change for good. Every change can be a change for good, even though it doesn't appear so on the surface. The second technique in terms of changing your way of thinking about negative experiences is to bless or release the people who are involved. Very often when things happen, such as the job that was lost, it's easy to blame the boss or blame the people that are involved and to continue to keep this animosity or negative spirit or negative thought process moving forward in your consciousness. And so detach yourself from that by releasing the people who are involved. Release the negativity, the animosity, the anger that you feel towards them. And the next step is to open yourself to the possibility that something good is going to come into your life. Every time a challenge comes to you or to me, we have the option of saying that we are unhappy and remaining where we are, or dealing with the reality of the circumstance and situation and accepting the fact that we are in this situation, this difficulty has come, this challenge is present in our life experience, and now something is going to come to guide and direct us in this experience. Our attitudes determine the way that we feel about life. Our thoughts create things in our being. As we change our way of thinking, we can change the quality of our life. If your thinking, if your thought process brings you more pain and suffering, if your thought process continues to hold you down, if your thought process keeps you from moving forward in accepting and realizing the changes of life, then your personal growth and your personal happiness is stopped by your own way of thinking. There is one place in this world where there is no change, there are no problems. That's in the cemetery. All of us who are alive, all of us who are in this physical experience, are going to constantly be faced with change and with challenge. And our attitude about the changes and challenges will determine the fiber of our lives. And so as you face challenges and change in your life, I invite you to declare each change, even though it appears negative, to be good, to bless and release all of the people who are involved, and to open yourself to the fact that every change is going to bring you a new reality and a magnificent learning experience. These are new concepts and may be totally different from what you have thought of or heard in the past. But if you'll embrace them and if you'll try to apply them to your daily life, a magnificent new vista will open, a new way of thinking. And as that thought process changes, your life will change for the good. We believe in prayer as a centering force and an opportunity to come together as children of God. And so we'd like to pause at this part of the program and invite you to join with us in a reflection and a time of meditation and prayer. Eternal God, we gather together our hearts and minds in the realization of your divine presence. We know that you are in our midst and that you are in the midst of every change that comes into our lives. We choose to be happy and fulfilled at the expectation of great good coming from every change and every challenge. We embrace these concepts with vitality and joy in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That's one of the most important things in life, change, and it's what people resist most of all. We've heard that all our lives, but you gave some wonderful examples there of how people resist change.
We always resist change, I think, because we like to be comfortable, or we believe that we're comfortable with things the way they are. But in reality, the only way that we can grow in the world or in spirit is through the process of change.
That's correct, and it's human nature to resist. It's human nature to want to keep the status quo. And when you told the very interesting story about the saw being left in the woods, well, I thought how interesting that was, that they didn't know what it was. It's just like the Aztecs and Mayans and all the various Indian people of Mexico, and some of the other Latin countries didn't know the value of gold as we think of the value of gold today. They thought of it as the beauty of the gold, and that it was something for the gods, and they offered it to the gods, and they used it to adorn their leaders, but they didn't use it for a means of exchange.
And as time has changed, gold has changed, and from any given time, something in the world that we attach value to may be less or more valuable in the future too.
Yes, yes. It's just like diamonds were always considered the most precious gem, and now alexandrites and some emeralds and some perhaps other stones, I don't know, but those I know can be more expensive than diamonds. And that's part of the change.
The world is constantly changing, and I think the world is changing for our spiritual benefit, and we don't often think of that. I think it's important for us to remember that that the physical life that we have is, as we say, the school of the soul. And so we are here in the physical life to learn lessons for our spiritual well-being, and life is simply school, and so the lessons that are brought forth are brought in the change.
Yes, and if we don't accept change, we're not learning our lessons because we're not flowing with those changes. It's hard to change, but on the other hand, it's really very easy if we look at it in that way. And when we realize, as you just said, that we're here for change, we're here to grow, and if we don't accept change, then we're not growing.
And one of the easiest ways to change is to change our way of thinking. And that process is one that we can do at any time. And that is simply to change the way that we think about change.
That's the difference, I think, in youth and the older age. And some older people welcome change and they are wonderful about change. But most, as a rule, dread change and fight it and resist. I know when I used to be in the workforce, my boss would always say, the most difficult thing I have is to get these people to change. He had about 100 employees in that one facility and others in other facilities. And I'm sure you have that in your work field today.
Very true. To get people to
Yes,
change,
to
but
not resist.
to not resist the change and to embrace the concept of change. But I think as we get older, the people who resist change are the people who have resisted it all of their life and they've
Yeah.
gotten good at it.
Yes, and they become more and more fearful.
They,
And it creates a greater fear. The more they resist, the more fearful they become.
I think they build on their negative experiences. When we're young, we're willing to be hurt
Yes.
and to recover. We're willing to be hurt and forgive.
Yeah.
Where we learn this negative consciousness or awareness. And so many people, as they go through the experience of physical life, become better and better at fearing change because they believe that as the changes come, they have less control and more negative things are happening to them. Where I think the older person who is embracing change and welcomes change is one who has welcomed the changes throughout their life.
Yes, and many of us do that, but those of us who welcome change still are very fearful of it. I know at your church in the 80s, when I did those Wednesday evening services, I said almost every Wednesday, we're going to be facing greater change in the next decade than we've known in the past 200 years, and we've known greater change in the past 200 that we knew in the past 2000. And I was just prattling because I didn't realize the enormity of what I was saying, because we've come into those changes in the 90s, and they are tremendous. But they're all for the good, and they're all necessary.
And they're prompting us, I think, to move into a new age.
Yes.
And I think that the acceleration of world changes and spiritual changes have come about because we as a race, we as a people need to become more conscious of the value of change and get better at embracing change. And when I talk about the race, I'm talking about the entire human race.
Exactly.
That the entire planet is getting better at accepting change.
Yeah.
And the only way that we can get good at accepting change and changing our mental process about change is to endure it and experience it over and over again and to embrace it.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying that that's part of our spiritual growth. We've evolved to a higher level of understanding, so we're more able to accept change. On the other hand, we're faced with greater change, so it evens out.
Mm-hmm. But change probably is the one consistent gift that God has given to all of us. When we begin as infants coming into this life, our physical being changes,
Yeah.
our material being changes, that is our financial situation and our social standing and situation as we grow. All of the things of our life change. Our relationships change. Nothing remains static. And so when we look at universal truth, it's very ridiculous for us to ever look for a time when we could be free of change. As a matter of fact, what the universe says to us and what Spirit says to us is that change is the one constant and it is the one dynamic creation of God that is sent to us over and over again.
And the way we perceive it, the way we react to any change depends on the way we perceive that change. If we're fearful, then we don't perceive it in a progressive way. And we need to drop the fear of change.
Fearing change does the same thing that fear does in any environment. It creates a paralysis.
Yeah.
It paralyzes the spirit and the emotion and the being. And when we're paralyzed, we can't move. And we can't go forward, we can't go backward. Although when we are paralyzed with fear, we're most often conscious of the past, more conscious of the past than of the future. We want things the way we think they should be,
Yeah.
the way that we want them to be. And we're not open to other possibilities.
And as you say so often, it's not possible to live in the past and be progressive or to be happy, because that's not where it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to be cautious about spending too much time in the past or too much time in the future. We need to be in the present.
Yeah.
We need to be in the now. And that is part of the fundamental process of accepting change. I think when we have a change, especially a negative change in our lives, we need to acknowledge that this is where we are. This has happened. If we lose our job, we have lost our job. If we're sick, this is the circumstance in which I find myself. And now what do I do?
Yes, to look for solutions instead of bemoaning the change. I can remember my dad, when he was 90 years old, said to me, "Don't let anyone tell you that the good old days are past, these are the good old days. And he was able to accept change in his life, all his life.
And people who are honest and realistic know that the good old days weren't so good.
Exactly.
If we go back to the period of the 20s and the 30s, many times that we talk about the good old days, when people speak of the good old days, very often it is a natural process of mind that is manifesting itself, and that is that we tend to see and remember the good because that's our nature. Regardless of how much we try to push down our spiritual nature, we are good. We were created good. We think good thoughts. We do good deeds. And when we do anything that is negative, it tends to be a negation of what our true self is. So as we look into the past, we always remember the good times.
Yeah.
That's a normal process. When we look at someone who has passed away, regardless of whether they were good or otherwise, for the most part, we see them as good because that's our nature. And that is our spiritual dimension, to see the good in people. And that's what we see coming when we look at the past and say they were the good old days. In truth, they were just days like these.
Yes, with greater hardship because we have more conveniences today than we ever had before.
Absolutely. Every progressive step that humankind has made has brought us to a better and better quality of life. That's a true gift that humanity has given to the planet and that God has given to all of us, regardless of all of the negative glitches, and we certainly can see them in historical perspective. But for the most part, the quality of life has been progressively better because it is evolving and moving in unceasing progression toward a higher and better understanding.
Yes, and everything is transformation. We have to transform from what we don't want to what we do want, and if we can't accept change, then we can't use that transformative aspect in life. And I was talking with a lady yesterday. We went into a past life therapy modality for her because she's very claustrophobic, painfully so, and she was afraid to fly all her life because she was afraid that she couldn't. But she, to her credit, has worked through all these problems on her own with the help of one person or another, but she has done it herself. And so now she's not even afraid to fly anymore. But she wanted to know where that started. And so we went back to a time when she was flying. One time she made notes. She just kept writing because as she wrote, she was able to conquer the fear by just putting her thoughts on paper. So she said, I wonder how the paper, I'm just wondering how people came across the prairie in those days. And then she felt that she was coming across the prairie in a covered wagon. And then she was able to go into this modality of the past where she had been locked into a box. And that's where her claustrophobia began. So if this woman was not willing to accept change, I think she wouldn't have been able to have found the solution to her problem of the claustrophobic situation.
She would have remained in it.
Yes.
And I think that's the one thing that we miss realizing when we don't embrace change. When we don't embrace change, we are doomed and destined to relive that circumstance and situation until we're able to release it or accept it. And that process of embracing change brings liberation. And each changing event in our life brings liberation or value. If it doesn't liberate us, it brings us some value. And when we deny the acceptance of change, especially negative changes, then we will continue to experience the results of that experience until we come to know it fully.
And I don't know what you tell people to use as keys for accepting change, but I know that one thing is good health, because when we're unhealthy, we're more fearful. And what else would you say for accepting change?
Well, I think a care in terms of the mental process. And of course, we talk a lot about creative mind and the reality that we live in our minds and not in the world. So the embracing of change becomes something that we can train our minds to accept and to open to. One of the things that I often tell people when they're challenged or troubled is to put themselves in neutral if they can. If they can't make it positive, if they can't see beyond the experience, at least put themselves in neutral. And so I think obviously we'd want to look out for our health, our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, but then we'd want to get ourselves out of the focus of the problem once we acknowledge it or the change, so that we can open ourselves to the receptivity of divine mind or the creative mind that will bring us the direction that we need.
Yes. That's, it's just so important that we care for others too. I think it's in caring for others that we're able to get out of ourselves and then accept change that comes into our lives.
We can't live in a vacuum, and we can't live isolated, even if in our thought process we think about others or we pray for others. So
Yeah.
that's a very important part, the connectiveness of life,
Yes.
in order to embrace change and to deal with our daily lives as well.
And then having faith in God, of course, in an ultimate being, that would be another way of avoiding resisting change.
Absolutely, and viewing every change as a gift from God. Now, that is not the process as some people, especially traditional Christians, have talked about God permitting negative things to happen in life. In reality, we don't believe that. We believe that circumstances and situations present themselves in life. So God allows, and in our environment, we participate in a constant process of change. And so those changes come about because of the thought processes that we've gone through and our life. And so it is change that is really a gift from God, and it is a gift for our learning and our unfolding.
Yeah. It's a wonderful thing to be able to talk with you about change and I hope that our listening public has been able to take some cues from that and to know that change is normal, it's inevitable, and the way we face life it depends on how we're able to accept those change and to grow spiritually.
From within, confident